Hi everyone, good afternoon, good morning. Welcome to those people who have joined this webinar from across the Caribbean and other parts of the world. This webinar is on tackling plastic in small island developing states and as part of the Jeff Islands program. My name is Alison Watson and I'll be moderating the session today. Next slide, please. So we have a very busy agenda ahead of us with some fantastic speakers, starting with Melanie Ashton from the Jeff Islands project, who will be launching our webinar today. Then we have Laurence Miller-Iucn, who will be telling us about the new plastics economy global commitment. We're also very lucky today to have Asha Challenger join us to share her thoughts on the recent negotiations at Iucn. And finally, Jannika will be joining us, and it could be Joel as well, from Iucn, to talk about the importance of effective, quantifiable solutions to address plastic leakage in small island developing states. There'll also be plenty of time for questions and discussion. Next slide, please. Now, before we start with our speakers, I just really want to explain quickly how to interact in today's session. So we really encourage an interactive session. There's not a lot of us, so we should be able to actually have a really fruitful, full discussion. The best place for you to share your thoughts, share resources and ask, and also sort of thank a speaker or make comments is the chat box. But if you want to ask if you want to ask questions to our speakers, it would be great if you could use the question and answer box. It just means that all the questions go in one place and we can move through them and moderate the session quite easily with the speakers. Please also put your hand up if you would like to speak. Because it's not a big room, it means we will be able to offer this opportunity. You just need to have to press the raise hand and we will unmute you, particularly when we come to the roundtable discussion at the very end of the session. So now I'd like to move on to the next slide, and I'd like to introduce Melanie Ashton, who'll provide some welcoming remarks on behalf of Jeff Islands and help to set the scene for today's discussion. Melanie, welcome.
Thanks, Alison. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all here today to the first Jeff Islands webinar. The Global Environment Facility, implementing sustainable, low and non-chemical development in small island developing states, is working across the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean and the Pacific to support 33 SIDS. In the next year, we'll also be expanding our support to Atlantic SIDS. A global project connects and facilitates SIDS to SIDS learning across and between project regions, including through dedicated communities of practice on the Green Forum and jeffislands.org, our knowledge management platform. As part of our SIDS to SIDS learning efforts, over the next 5 years, Jeff Islands will be hosting webinars on key issues SIDS are facing in management of chemicals and waste. We aim to bring you insights, shared experience, and hopefully some thought leadership on how SIDS can move forward towards a low and non-chemical development. We hope that these webinars will assist in identifying opportunities for SIDS and provide a space to share best practices and solutions. We're excited to have the opportunity to bring the SIDS community together through this medium and look forward to an animated discussion today. Today, in our first webinar, we're exploring plastics. The issues of persistent organic pollutants and plastics are linked on many levels. Plastics and POPs pose distinct risks to human health at every stage of their life cycle. In the manufacture of plastics, various chemical additives are included to improve their quality despite potentially negative health and environmental effects. For example, PBDEs are a group of brominated flame retardants, and these include substances listed in the Stockholm Convention for Elimination, penta-BDE, octa-BDE, and deca-BDE. For example, penta-BDE has been used in polyurethane foam for car and furniture upholstery. Octa and deca have been used mainly in plastic casing for electronics. PFOS is lipid and water repellent and has been used in a wide variety of applications, including in carpets, leather, textiles, rubber, and plastics. Short-chain chlorinated paraffins are industrial chemicals primarily used in metalworking, but also in flame retardants, and also they're used as softeners in plastics. Recently, PVC baby bibs were found to contain SCC short-chain chlorinated paraffins. These have also been found in other products favored by children. And it goes without saying that recycling materials containing POPs contaminates the resulting products and continues the legacy of hazardous emissions and exposure. This is especially damaging to a true circular economy. As you can understand, a lot of plastic is contaminated with POPs, and furthermore, halogenated plastics such as PVC produce POPs, dioxins and furans when burned. Sadly, the links between POPs and plastics don't end with distinct and specific products that require careful management. Microplastics, ubiquitous in the world's oceans, are hydrophobic in nature and absorb and carry carcinogenic POPs. That is, microplastics assist in the long-range transport of these chemicals that we're attempting to phase out. For island SIDS to move towards sustainable non- and low chemical development pathways, careful examination and consideration of plastics management is required. Jeff Island SIDS are culturally diverse and geographically isolated from each other. However, they have some important things in common. They're largely import-dependent economies located remotely from global markets and commonly with outer islands spread across vast distances. This situation is exacerbated by limited available landmass to manage waste, as well as high economic vulnerability to economic and natural exogenous shocks, lack of critical mass of people, infrastructure, and investments. Across the Caribbean, Indian Ocean, and Pacific regions, Jeff Islands is investing $20 million over the next 5 years to enhance the safe management of products entering SIDS. That is, closing material and product loops for plastic-containing products. The outcome we're working towards is the prevention of the buildup of harmful materials and chemicals, and this will be achieved through establishing effective circular and life cycle management systems in partnership with the private sector. Achieving this requires action from all actors, SIDS governments, the private sector, and populations. And so, with that brief overview of the interaction between POPs, plastics, and the activities...
panorámica de la interacción entre los POPs y los plásticos, es grato para mí presentar el compromiso global de la nueva economía del plástico que permite al sector privado y el gobierno desarrollar acciones para la
It allows governments to voluntarily test different approaches to address the full cycle of plastic products. SIDS face unique challenges around plastic waste management. Solutions and lessons learned from global commitment signatories can provide SIDS with important insights across key progress areas. These include the elimination of problematic or unnecessary plastic packaging and products through redesign and innovation, designing for reuse, recycling, or composting, decoupling, primarily by reducing the need for virgin plastic, also consumer awareness and behavioral change, as well as measurement and reporting. So we hope this webinar is informative, generative, and useful to your work. We very much hope you will join the island's plastic community of practice on the Green Forum and continue the conversation there and exchange on this key issue. Today marks the official launch of the plastics community, and you're all invited to sign up and contribute. Please also share with your colleagues. This webinar is also streaming in that group. Thanks again for attending today, and I look forward to the discussion. Thanks, Alice.
Thanks, Melanie. And a big thank you to you and the Jeff Islands team for organising this webinar. It's now my pleasure to welcome Laurence Miller-Iucn, Head of the Secretariat Lifecycle Initiative at UNEP. Laurence will be talking us through the New Plastics Economy Global Commitment, what it is, why it's important, and how to get involved. Welcome, Laurence.
Thank you so much, Alison, and thanks also to begin with to the Jeff Islands project and Melanie for welcoming us and for bringing the opportunity to speak about the global commitment. So maybe Marine will try to move relatively fast. So if you already move to the next slide, which is just the cover for the global commitment. I mean, I guess just to highlight here that you will see both logos, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and the UN Environment Programme. The global commitment was launched by both organizations. And well, this is something that we're carrying forward together with collaboration of many stakeholders. So moving to the next slide, what is the global commitment? So as you see here, it was launched in 2018. It is a multi-stakeholder partnership, if you want. It's essentially a group of actions that was designed by both UNEP and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation by assessing the whole plastic system and identifying those actions that are necessary to be kind of put forward by the different actors across the plastics value chain in order to shift the whole system, the whole linear economy system in which plastic operates today, into a circular economy where plastic, ideally never becomes waste. Plastic products are kept in the economy at their highest value, and therefore they are prevented from entering the environment. And these groups of actions, we can essentially group them in these three main kind of areas that you see on the right of your screens. So we're talking about actions to eliminate essentially all the plastic. There is a lot of plastic products that we're using which are unnecessary or problematic. So we want to right away eliminate them from the economy. Then innovating, so the products that we actually need that are useful in the economy are designed in a way that is already circular, that are, the product are designed to be reusable, recyclable, or compostable, so that, they don't generate problems, that they don't have hazardous substances, as Melanie was mentioning before, so they can be safely cycled back into the economy. And then finally, to circulate. It's not enough to design things so they are kind of kept in the economy, but you actually also have to ensure that they are kept there. So moving to the next slide, we see that the global commitment is already mobilizing a significant amount of organizations. So we have over 500 signatories globally, which represent kind of the majority of them are actually from the private sector, over 250 signatories from the private sector. They represent over 20% of the global plastic packaging that is consumed globally. So this is significant. Still, we can say, well, where's the remaining 80%? They are not signatories yet, but well, we're working on that. There's also, and that will be the focus of today, currently 20 government signatories, but we had a significant boost last month in the One Ocean Summit when 11 new governments, so totaling now 31 governments all over the world, they are mainly national governments, so countries, but there's also subnational governments and cities that are a part of these 31, between signatories and the ones which are kind of becoming signatories. So they are, as I said, from all over the world. We have representation from all continents. And all of these actors are behind this vision for a new plastics economy that is kind of more rooted into the circular economy. They have been since 2018. I mean, some of them since 2018, some of them joined in the years following. And as mentioned, many are joining now in 2022. If we move to the next slide, we will see that all of them are already moving towards action, concerted action that is intended to shift the plastics economy to this circular economy. Every year, we produce a progress report with the reports of progress of each one of the signatories. And these are the three main takeouts from the 2021 report. The first message, and that was really significant, was that looking particularly at the private sector signatories and looking specifically at brands and retailers, so those who actually put packaging in the market, you will hear me, there is quite a significant focus on packaging, plastic packaging in the global commitment. It's not exclusively focused on the packaging, but certainly we find that plastic packaging is a key area of impacts in terms of plastic pollution. So we've been focusing a lot on that. And all these users of plastic packaging, after we have seen this massive growth in plastic production globally, well, since they joined all of these signatories, 20% of the plastic packaging market globally, they have actually started reducing the amount of virgin plastic that they consume. So that's a pretty significant thing. I mean, the market, the production of plastic is still growing globally, But among the signatories of the global commitment, they are demonstrating that they can continue to do business. They actually continue growing as businesses, but they use less virgin plastic. So this is demonstrated. This is something big that they demonstrated it's doable. Importantly as well, they have made commitments to continue this reduction of virgin plastic consumption. On the second message, however, is we see that the majority of this reduction has been made thanks to the incorporation of recycled material, recycled plastic into their products. So we're still not seeing enough elimination. We're still not seeing enough radical changes in the ways we use plastic, particularly in the case of packaging. Most of it is actually still single-use plastic packaging, but it now incorporates much more recycled content. So we can reduce the amount of virgin plastic. This is important, but we're still seeing that we need more radical changes. We need to shift away from single-use products, plastic products. And then, of course, at the moment this report was published in November 2021, we were highlighting the growing number of businesses and governments that were supportive of starting the negotiations for a global agreement. And of course now, as we will hear with Asha Challenger in the next presentation, we're there yet. We're already there. So we have come to this resolution in UNEA. So we are getting into the negotiations for a legally binding instrument on plastic pollution. So moving to the next slide, this is actually very quickly just an illustration of the first point I was making. So we see that among the private sector signatories of the global commitment, we have achieved what we could call peak virgin plastic. So they have already passed the top of their consumption of plastic. They are going down, and the trajectory that we see with their current commitments is that they will continue to reduce the amount of virgin plastic by close to 20% as compared to the baseline when they joined in 2018. They will have reduced close to 20% by 2025. And that while they continue to do business. So it's not that they have reduced the amount of business, it's that they are replacing this virgin plastic. So let's move please to the next slide, because as mentioned, we don't have a lot of time. And I wanted just to make some links with what we will hear next, because what we see in this, in the resolution that was adopted in UNEA, there is this paragraph that I want to highlight. So I guess Asha will be talking more about the legally binding instrument. There is one of the last paragraphs that still is calling all the member states to continue to step up activities. Essentially, this operative paragraph 15 is asking everybody not to stop, on the contrary, to step up the activities, the actions, while we're negotiating, because we cannot wait to have the instrument. The legal instrument will be extremely important, and all eyes, all the attention is focused there. But it's also important to continue acting, because every year that goes without us adopting the necessary measures sees more plastic getting to the environment. And that's something that we must continuously adopt. So I wanted to highlight that, these actions across the whole life cycle of plastic, voluntary actions as well, voluntary measures, sharing information, including statistical information, for instance, on packaging, plastic waste, statistical information of plastic waste, and the environmentally sound management of plastic waste. This is also important. And I highlight this because all of these elements are actually captured in the New Plastics Economy Global Commitment. And it's not that we had, prepared this in advance. I mean, the Global Commitment was launched in 2018, but it's actually very well aligned with this paragraph. So moving on, just to highlight the governments that, as I mentioned, we had these 20 governments already as part of the Global Commitment at the beginning of this year. But if we move to the next slide, we'll see that actually in February, these 11 new governments joined or said that they are in the process of joining. So you will see, the countries, member states that are painted in green. So that's kind of the picture is growing across the world. Grenada is actually one of the, today that we're speaking to the Caribbean, and Grenada was one of the first governments that joined. So I'm not sure if I've seen them in the list of participants today, but a big welcome. And certainly you see that, well, there is a growing momentum as well among the signatories of the global commitment, which we actually expect to continue to see growing, precisely because it aligns so well with the types of actions that are encouraged from member states while we are negotiating for a legally binding instrument. So let's move to the next slide to understand a bit better what are actually the signatories committing to. And this slide is a super quick summary of what the private sector signatories are committing to, and all of these actions are aligned with the initial vision, with those three big areas of action. But essentially, we're asking that when businesses sign, that they commit to eliminating the unnecessary and problematic plastics that they may be using in their value chains, that they implement and push for reusable business models, because we see the shift from single-use to reusable as an essential strategy, that particularly those businesses that are putting packaging in the market, that they commit for this packaging to be 100% reusable, recyclable, or compostable. And also they are making commitments to decouple their plastic use from the consumption of finite resources. So to reduce the consumption of virgin plastic. Let's move to the next one, because I see that we're running a bit late. And this is what the governments commit to. So in terms of the governments, like all the other signatories, governments that become signatories of the global commitment, they share the common vision that I described a bit earlier. They commit also to collaborate with all the stakeholders, and this is important to solve the problem of plastic pollution, as mentioned by Melanie in the beginning. They also commit to report annually, and this is extremely important. So it's not just the actions that you're doing, but also to share them publicly, because that ensures the transparency and ensures that everybody's seeing whether we're actually progressing in the right direction. And then more specifically, if you click once more, Marine, they commit as well to these 6 areas of action. So they commit specific actions that are defined at the national level. So the national or the government level, if it's a subnational government, each government defines the specific actions. But what we're asking is that they commit to actions in all of these 6 areas. And that's important because these 6 areas touch the whole life cycle of plastics. We have identified that if you're not working in these 6 areas, then the chances are that the problem is just being transferred from one side to the other. We need to touch the whole system in order to shift the system towards a circular economy. So very, very briefly, these areas are elimination of problematic or unnecessary plastic products, the shift towards reuse models, as mentioned as well, incentivizing that the plastic packaging that is used in your constituency is designed to be reusable, recyclable, or compostable. And again, different governments have different mandates and legislative capacities. So, that the specific actions depend very much on the government. Governments then all have to commit to increasing the collection and the recycling of plastic waste. And also to stimulate the consumption, not to stimulate the growth in consumption, but to ensure that the plastic that has been recycled can get back into the economy. So, incentivizing that secondary plastic is being reincorporated into the economy, because otherwise we end up with big piles of plastic that has been collected for recycling, but nobody wants it. And that, well, that doesn't help with the circularity. And finally, there's this
2 minutes, Lorenz.
Absolutely. I guess 2 seconds I should have been given, but thank you for that. Finally, also to insist on the importance of government action as well on raising awareness and changing behaviors. So let's move to the next slide. That's the final one, just to explain, and that will stay with you as well at the end of the webinar. This is just the process. If you're interested in becoming signatories and joining, there's links to explain everything that is required, the documents that are required, but you can always get back to one of the UNEP focal points for the global commitment, because UNEP is the interface with governments for the global commitment. So you have the emails there. Alison, who is moderating RAN, I think is also participating today, and myself. And then I think that's it. There's one more slide, but that's just to say thank you very much for your attention, and obviously we'll be very happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Lorenz. And I'm sure you'll get some good questions at the end. We're going to have Usher first. I've got a bit of time at the end, so it's okay. We won't. We'll take it relaxed and chilled. We don't need to speed up too much. But thank you very much. And all those links are in the chat. So if anyone would like some of those links to us as contacts, but also to links to the signatory pack, that's in the link in the chat box. And also, if you have any questions for Lorenz, please put them in the Q&A box as well. So now I'd just like to move on and introduce Usher Challenger, Lead Negotiator, Oceans Alliance of Small Island States, and also representative at the Permanent Mission of Antigua and Barbuda to the United Nations. And she's going to be providing us today with her thoughts on the recent negotiations at UNEA and some possible thoughts on the next steps for SIDS in the negotiations. So welcome, Usher. We're very lucky to have you join us. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison, and thanks to everyone. It's always difficult to follow Laurence, but I will try my best. So I do not have a PowerPoint. I'll just run through some of our thoughts of you as you've asked. So once again, thanks for inviting me to join. Oh, I must say that while I do perform in my role as lead oceans negotiator, I'll mostly be reflecting on in my national capacity. But I would dare say that our capacity, our perspective mirrors many of the Caribbean SIDS. So I just wanted to highlight that here as well. And we did negotiate at UNEA 5.2 as AOSIS, but I just want to ensure that it's clear that I'm speaking for Antigua and Barbuda today. So thanks for joining. Thanks for inviting me today, and thanks to the Jeff Islands Project, UNEP, and all the partners who have worked very hard to bring us together today. I'm honored to participate in this event as we reflect on the progress that has been attained at UNEA 5.2, which was just about a month ago. And we look ahead to the important work that we have at the INC. Just reflecting on the presentations we had this morning, it was very useful and informative opportunity to learn about opportunities for SIDS with regard to the new plastics economy global commitment. It's also very exciting to be part of the launch of the Islands and Plastic Communities of Practice on the Green Forum. And I just wanted to say that it was very encouraging to learn from the Global Commitment Progress Report that we have a very unique opportunity to capitalize on the momentum towards action on plastics. The signatory businesses, I must say, have made some bold commitments, including the reduction of the use of virgin plastics, and they do have some ambitious targets for future action that we're very excited to see. We have always advocated that this important work must involve all stakeholders, and we think that this in particular requires specific input from the private sector. And we stand ready to collaborate in order to meet these targets and achieve what we think is our global common objectives on this important matter. So just a little bit on the situation in SIDS. As we all know, plastic pollution is a global problem. And up until recently, we would have had several existing relevant international agreements that basically just touch on the issue, but none that are specific and targeted to this problem. Therefore, we saw that there was a need for global agreement, and we now have a mandate to work on this agreement. And we see that plastic pollution is a very urgent problem, and already small islands are feeling the effects of this plastic. We need a solution that works. We believe that long-term solutions include improved governance at all levels and behavioral and system changes, such as a more circular economy and more sustainable production and consumption patterns. However, we also continue to highlight that the most urgent short-term solution to reducing plastic inputs, especially in developing economies, is improving waste collection and management. Again, this is a key issue for small islands. Plastic pollution is already affecting our economies, disrupting tourism and harming our fisheries. Every so often there's a report on the impact of microplastics in fish. And this is something that our fishing communities take very importantly. And this is why I think the small islands have been the forefront of this issue. My own country, Antigua and Barbuda, we co-hosted a few years ago with the President of the General Assembly and Norway, a global marine plastic pollution event to raise awareness and to inspire change. Antigua and Barbuda was also the first country within the Caribbean to implement legislation to ban single-use plastics in 2017. This ban has since extended to styrofoam food containers, disposable cups and cutlery, and we see that this enabled nationwide behavioral change and a wider use of the understanding and the importance of sustainable products. Currently, Antigua and Barbuda and the Maldives, along with Norway, co-chair the Group of Friends Combating Marine Plastic Pollution here at UN headquarters in New York. And we also collaborate with the Group of Friends based in Nairobi. And this is to basically provide a space for discussion between member states and civil society regarding advancing progress on addressing plastic pollution. And up until recently, we were focused on the mandate resolution. So now we will shift our discussions into the actual negotiations and ensure that everyone's perspective is fully reflected. So a quick run through the status of negotiations. And of course, we're very happy and we welcome the adoption of the mandate resolution to launch the INC to negotiate a legally binding agreement to address plastic pollution, including in the marine environment. And this was a very hard-fought scope discussion that we've had, where we think that it's very important to address this problem from source to sea. It was very important to us that the mandate resolution did not prejudge the outcome of the INC, and that the resultant mandate allows sufficient space to consider and fully ventilate all views during the upcoming INC process. Again, it's important to reflect interventions from source to sea to prevent, reduce, and eventually eliminate plastic pollution. This is very important to us, including in the marine environment. We also welcome the full recognition of the life cycle and/or circular economy approaches to this issue, including consideration of extended producer responsibility, while recognizing the impact that upstream measures may have on SIDS and developing economies. And I'll speak a little bit more about that later. There was inclusion and references to the specific impact of plastic pollution on marine environment, with focus on the transboundary nature of this issue, which, as you can imagine, is very, very important to island states. SIDS required that the inclusion of measures that can be utilized to reduce existing plastic pollution in the marine environment. So this is our remediation and addressing a waste that's already in the marine environment. That's something that was very important to us. Another thing that we're happy got included was consideration of the role of traditional knowledge, Indigenous people and local communities, and as well as science in the deliberation of the INC. We really wanted to ensure that this was on par and that this knowledge is fully considered as we work through this INC. There is good language on flexibility in means of implementation, guided by the principles of the Rio Declaration, national circumstances and capabilities, adequate finance, and tech transfer. And these are all very, very hard-fought discussions that we had in the INC. I'm not going to that, but that's something that SIDS see as a very, very important part of the mandate for further discussion. And it was also clear during the negotiations that there are a wide range of views about the way that this agreement should work, and that we have a lot of work ahead to ensure that the solution meets the unique needs of all member states. I think that we found quite a good balance in the mandate resolution from all perspectives. We went in without a scope, we went in without an understanding whether it was marine plastic or plastic in the marine environment. And I think that we have a document now that allows everyone to be able to address their issues. And I guess we need to convince each other on how we can move forward on this. So just some key points on the elements of a solution to this problem that I think are important for SIDS. And like I said, we think that first there needs to be a reduction in production. And we see that circular economy initiatives are key to this. Another part is the reduction and the management of waste and recycling. And this, in all honesty, is very expensive to developed countries, and there is little market for the product. I know Laurent spoke about, we can collect all the plastics, we can collect all these things, but then where do they go? Where are they processed? Are they sustainably processed? Is the processing environmentally sound? All of these things are considerations that we need to have. And this is often not something that we have the current capacity in small islands to address. And another part that's important to us is the cleanup of existing waste. And we see that the start of this is initially to prevent litter from entering the ocean and just to avoid the transboundary impacts. So we do see it from the top down and the bottom up. So again, preventing the litter from entering the ocean in the first place. And then for when there is leakage, we want to then ensure that it is not released into the environment. And then we need a lot of cooperation for support for local waste management and collection. So, and I thought that when Laurence mentioned that there are some local governments that are involved in this, that I think that's very, very important, because oftentimes the state does not have there's the mandate, but they're not actually involved in the waste management. So it's very important to ensure that all levels of government, whether that's from the state level, the local level, the community level, the village level, in many of our communities are on board with this. So I'll just go forward quickly so we do know that the mandate resolution gave us the opportunity to meet soon to discuss the modalities of the INC. So just in terms of immediate next steps, I'll just talk about what we're looking forward to in this preparatory meeting that has been established. So we look forward to the confirmation of the location, the format, the dates of this prep meeting, and hopefully this comes through really, really soon, as we do know that the environmental calendar is filling up really, really quickly. So we look forward to confirmation of that. And we're interested in ensuring the full engagement in the INC process, including possible membership on the Bureau of SIDS and facilitation of work streams as necessary. And we look forward to working through the modalities at the prep meeting to ensure that this is possible. And also, we hope that there will be an establishment of a funding mechanism, whether that be a voluntary trust fund, to allow for effective participation of delegates through full DSA support for SIDS in order to get to these meetings. And I just want to talk about a very important issue for SIDS in this entire process, and that's capacity building. Capacity building in SIDS are indispensable for achieving any national and global priorities to address the pervasive issues of plastics. We must find a solution that addresses this issue at all the different entry points in order to give what we think a common vision that can be articulated through the INC process, and also once we're through the INC process into the treaty for implementation. strong capacity building and transfer of technology mechanisms to address the problems at all levels of responsibility and development are needed. This is particularly relevant to the issue of plastic litter and plastic pollution and microplastics, again, due to the transboundary nature of the problem, resulting from the unintentional international movement of plastic waste. Specifically, we see that there should be that there is a need for finance for implementation in order to increase action by SIDS. While small islands have taken action to date, those have been primarily low-cost interventions, like I mentioned, the plastic bag bans and some legislative changes. In order for there to be increased waste management, including recycling, or any actions to reduce plastic produce will require support. And also, capacity building will be required to determine the most effective regulatory interventions for the small islands, to examine the best practices from other similarly situated states and industries, to develop these regulatory structures and to take action, to develop national action plans. This is not just finance, but we'll also require some technical support as well. So
1 minute,
in
Ashley.
regard, oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, I'll wrap up. So currently there's very little knowledge on the individual plastic production capacity and this related scientific and technical infrastructure that exists in many SIDS. And this information will be critical to participate and for national and international efforts to be effective in supporting SIDS to address these. At this, I'll just go ahead. And so I just want to say here that speaking from EOSIS briefly, we're grateful to support that UNEP has provided to facilitate research on plastic production within SIDS. And this research will assist in providing insight on the status of plastic production and therefore inform our engagement in the upcoming INC. And just to conclude quickly, there is great enthusiasm for this issue within SIDS, and we are building our competency. But there is still a long way to go. And we see that this issue cannot be solved nationally or regionally, and solutions will require international cooperation, including meaningful commitments by the private sector. And I see that this webinar, the framework that's being discussed here, it can go far in meeting these, again, what I think are our common objectives. So I will wrap up there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Asha. And thank you so much for the summary there of the negotiations and sharing your thoughts on progress and some wider thoughts on the challenges that SIDS have with plastic pollution and addressing that. I heard it was a very busy meeting at UNAS, so congratulations on surviving the long days to help get the important work moving forward. So congratulations there, and thank you for your efforts. I'm going to open the floor to some questions now. So I'll give you a little bit of a break, Asha, and just ask Lorenz while you catch your breath, the first questions. But Lorenz, what happens, and this comes up quite a bit, this question, if countries set commitments and targets under the global commitment and then don't successfully meet them by 2025? Well, what happens in that?
Yeah, that's a good one. Thanks, Alison. So, I mean, essentially, just also, insisting that the global commitment is a voluntary initiative. So, I mean, the global commitment appeared because there was no legally binding instrument or treaty. So we put forward a voluntary commitment to essentially channel and kind of make concerted action. But of course, governments and all the other actors, they come into this, with their free will and with their best intentions and make the commitments that are hopefully very ambitious, but also realistic. At the end of the day, if those ambitions are not met, I mean, this is nothing legally binding. I mean, there are no penalizations other than, of course, everybody sees, because this is, there's a transparent reporting, so everybody can see that you haven't met your commitment. Having said this, if you aim for something really ambitious and miss it, I think everybody will still be very kind of welcoming to the fact that you've actually tried hard. Probably better to aim high and miss than aim low and achieve your goals. But in any case, it's a voluntary initiative. So hopefully that clarifies.
No, thanks, Lorenz. And who actually signs on behalf of countries? It's another common question we have.
Absolutely, thank you. And that depends a little bit. I mean, usually, particularly when we talk about countries, it's usually the ministers of environment, but it depends, depending on a little bit as well on the organization of the country. Sometimes it can be kind of the directors of specific agencies that are, if there exist agencies that are kind of particularly in charge of plastic pollution, it could be that as well. Sometimes it's ministers of foreign affairs or kind of coordination ministers if several ministries are involved, which is also quite common. But it depends a little bit on the governments. I mean, every government decides who is the best person. I mean, usually we ask at the highest possible level to generate the commitment, but this depends very much on the governments.
Okay, great. Asha, here's a question for you from Kevin. Any thoughts on transparency and accountability in addressing plastic pollution?
Thank you. Transparency in terms of, so there's transparency in terms of reporting, in terms of plastic production, in terms of implementation, and there's also another side of transparency. And I think that our initial speaker spoke about the process of plastic production to ensure that we know what's in it. So in terms of on the second side, I just wanted to be clear which measure of transparency is referring to. But in terms of implementation, we see that it's very, very important too. And we would like to see, to be honest, global reporting on plastic production, global reporting on reduction. We know that it's not governments that are producing these goods, so it may be difficult to get this from the private sector. And we do have a good chunk of private sector actors already involved, and I hope that they're committing to do this. But we think that that's very important, because if we don't know our baseline, how do we know when we've completed? We do hope that in the long run, there will be zero plastic pollution. There are measures of the gyres and the amount of tons that are going into the oceans and going into our rivers and our waterways and even onto our land. We would need to, I think it'd be very important to have a baseline on where production is now, where we would like production to be in the future, and how we're working towards closing that. I do know that there are some measures in, I think, the Osaka Blue, talking about zero additional plastic into the ocean. We need to have these baselines. So I think transparency is very, very important in that aspect. And on the other side, when we talk about POPs and microplastics, for us in SIDS, it's very important to know what we're importing, what is in, what are these bottles made of? So what are these materials made of? Is there leaking into our environments? Are we imbibing chemicals unintentionally? So transparency on that side is also very, very important to us.
Okay,
great.
Thanks.
Hope that answers your question.
No, it was a bit of an open question there, so you did a very good job. And actually, it's sort of quite related to some of the work that Lorenz is doing in the global commitment. I mean, there's quite a bit of work there around reporting and understanding, quantifying baseline. That's right, Lorenz. I mean, can you give us a little bit of, maybe just a bit of background how important that is to understanding how countries choose to commit to different targets?
Yes, absolutely. And indeed, and that varies a bit. I mean, as we saw, there are 6 broad areas of actions for governments. There is one of them where we request kind of the reporting of specific metrics, and that's the area where usually more information has been provided, which is on plastic waste. So we're already providing, particularly from this coming year, where this metric becomes mandatory, we're hoping to start putting much more information out there in terms of the amount of plastic waste that is being generated every year in every government jurisdiction, and the amount of that plastic waste that is being recycled. So that's kind of one area where I mean, that's the common area where we ask everybody to report on quantities. And then we encourage governments also to report on specific metrics in some of the other areas. But there, of course, it's also quite interesting to see, particularly the first area of elimination, so the bans, and how much problematic and unnecessary plastic products are not making it to the market. So this is where we are kind of providing guidance on governments on how to estimate the amounts that have been avoided through the bans, through the efforts of elimination. But certainly there's all the other areas where we're also trying to push for more transparency or for more reporting, because yes, having the data is important. But I echo what Asha was saying in terms of the data on production of plastic. That's usually not the governments that hold these data. But for that, we're also trying to push sector business sector alliances that provide the access to the production data.
Excellent. Thanks, Lorenz. And I'm going to leave, Asha, we do have a discussion, a roundtable discussion at the end, but just to finish off this section, I'm going to leave you with the last question here. And it's really around what are some of the best ways, maybe just one or two, to inspire change that you have seen in a SIDS context?
So I think for this issue, there's really a behavioral change that needs to happen, and that takes time. We've gotten very, very used to the convenience, the access, the ease of plastics, and it takes a little while to divorce that convenience to the sustainability, to the long-term need for doing better, in essence. I can just speak to there was a bit of a pushback in terms of the plastic bans, particularly the food service containers, because they're not as leak proof sometimes, they're not as durable sometimes, or what we have currently. So there was concern and reluctance, but then at the end of the day, we see that there's less waste, that there's less litter, there's less, and then we do think about future climate change has become a lot more important to us in small islands. So we think about our impact. We think about our footprint to a different, to some extent. So it's just about, I think for us, I think it's just the consciousness raising, the behavioral change that takes sometimes a little bit of prodding. So in this time it took legislation, but at the end, I think it's just a way of life. Now, when I travel and I see plastic bags in the supermarkets, I'm like, okay, you still have plastic bags.
It is quite confronting when you get used to not seeing them and all of a sudden you go somewhere and you see them. It can be quite shocking. All of a sudden you remember what it used to be like. Yeah, that's a great example of the kind of reverse. But thank you very much, Asha, for speaking. And if you could just stay to the end, we'll probably might have a few more questions for you. But thank you so much, and thank you, Lorenz. And we'll move on to our next part of the session, where I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Jannika de Silva, Senior Program Coordinator of the Global Marine and Polar Program. And he is actually stepping in for Joel. I don't think he's here yet, but that's okay, because I know you're going to do a wonderful presentation and you work collaboratively and know what's going on. So welcome to the webinar, and we're very interested to see some examples of these sorts of quantifiable solutions to addressing plastic leakage and circular solutions. So welcome.
Thank you very much, for this opportunity for Jeff Islands for us to present some of the work that we're doing. If I could have the first slide, please, or second slide. As it comes on screen, this work has been funded by NORAD, and it's titled Iucn's Plastics Waste-Free Island Project. And it's a project that is now in its final year that focuses on 6 islands, 3 in the Caribbean and 3 in the Pacific. So we've got Antigua and Barbuda, and I'm happy to see Asha, because we do work in Antigua and Barbuda and be sharing some of that work. St. Lucia and Grenada in the Caribbean. And in the Pacific, we are working in Fiji, Vanuatu, and Samoa. So what I will be sharing is some of the learning and lessons that we've observed in the past 3 years as we progress to looking at some of these issues from a perspective of small island developing states. So if I could have the next slide, please. And I'm not going to spend too much time here, but I think our previous speakers have very eloquently presented the issues around plastic in the context of small island developing states. And waste management is clearly a major issue, and our dependence on plastic, which has grown quite substantially over the last decades, has actually created a very significant problem for small island developing states in particular. Part of those problems are beyond addressing at a national level and are global in nature, as we've heard, and thus the requirement and need for a global plastics treaty to address that. But my focus here today is really to talk more about what can be done at a very specific national level. Next slide, please. And really, the first step to all of this, and I think it has also been highlighted earlier, is you need to have a good, solid baseline to make decisions. Because if you don't know what you have, you cannot measure it. It's very challenging to make changes. The second point is, and has been discussed earlier, is really addressing it across the whole life cycle of plastics, right from its extraction, design, manufacturing, sales, and consumption. But our focus in this particular project has been more at the level of the national use and recycling portions, which I will discuss. The third point is really, it's an economic problem. And if it is an economic problem, it is vital to make the economic case for taking action. And that is really vital if you want to make change. Because if the numbers don't match, there is no rationale for taking action. And this is something we've also tried to address within the context of this program. The broader issues with regards to plastic are really doesn't add up. If you actually look at it from the point of extraction of oil, the processing, and to the final product, which is something very simple, the economics shouldn't make sense, but they do for some reason. And that obviously is not going to be in the context of this discussion, but really is something that has to be dealt with if we are to address this issue in a global context. Next slide, please. So with that, just to give you a sense of what the Plastic Waste-Free Island project is, as I mentioned, it is focusing on 3 countries in the Caribbean and 3 in the Pacific. And really these are, I would say, pilots that we use to understand the situation. And the idea and concept is to expand that knowledge so that we have a much better idea of how to address it at a global level with regard to small island developing states in particular. And it all starts with identifying and assessing the problem. And in our initial assessments, what we recognized was there were 3 major sectors that needed to be focused on, and that was tourism, fisheries, and the waste management sector. And if you address those 3 main areas, the likelihood of addressing the majority of the problem is possible. And so the quantification methods that we've used are really the mechanism by which we get the baseline. But understanding what we have is just the first point. You also need to know where it goes and how usable it is if you are interested in something like recycling, because quite often the plastic we produce or gets waste cannot be recycled because of its quality or content. So it is quite important to look at that element. Coming out of that is really what do you do with that part of the that cannot be recycled. And it is quite considerable. So there has to be a solution to that element. So the project actually takes all of that knowledge and information and then uses essentially an assessment of the policy landscape at a national level to understand what actually can be done or what should be done in terms of gaps and action points. And using this information suggests solutions, which ultimately we hope combined together from all of these 6 countries will enable us to produce a blueprint that will enable to be replicated in other parts of other countries related to small island developing states. Interestingly, I think also the issues that come out of small island developing states are very relevant to cities. Because if you look at it in terms of consumption, size, and demographics, they're actually very similar. So I think what we can learn from small island developing states can also be very relevant to dealing with issues in particularly large urban areas, which actually have very similar problems. Next slide, please. So the first step is quantification. And the project essentially did in early 2019 in each of the 6 countries, a detailed assessment of the waste management systems and the quantity of plastic waste and leakage that was occurring in each of those 6 countries. And what was apparent out of that, actually, if you look at the overall waste, it really is predominantly organic, as if you look on that slide on the left, represented by the green bar. And that in many countries is actually being already addressed through various variety of different programs. Plastic makes a relatively small portion, but however, it's extremely important because it does not degrade and it essentially fills up in the waste management system. Where this project goes a little further is actually looking at that distribution of plastic in terms of its polymer type. And that is particularly important if we're looking for solutions, because depending on the type of polymer, the solutions can vary from what you can do with it or how you can dispose of it. So understanding that material and its structure is actually extremely important. And the figure on the right here sort of demonstrates not just understanding what is out there, but what portion of that can be recyclable. And so if you look, you will see on the top right-hand corner, that very large bubble, which actually indicates essentially all PET and HDP that can be recycled. So there are different parts of plastic that may be very large and are potentially recyclable, whereas others that may not be. And this is extremely important as we look for solutions. Next slide, please. Coupled with solutions is actually looking at the policy and regulatory environment. And I think in particular, the Caribbean has been quite advanced in dealing with some of the initial regulations with regards to single-use plastics, anion styrofoam and other elements. And this is also seen in many other small island developing states. Having said that, there are a number of different areas that certainly can be improved. One looks at the different sectors. So some of them are very specific to the tourism sector, whereas others might relate to the solid waste sector or solid waste management sector or fisheries, as the case may be. And looking at those issues with regards to across the life cycle, we in totally have identified potentially around 85 different interventions and instruments that could potentially be addressed towards looking at the plastic solutions or addressing plastic waste in the context of some of these countries that we've been looking at. And as I mentioned earlier, related to that is also the need for making the economic case. And I think, as was pointed out, particularly the impact on the marine environment and the economic impacts to, for example, the fishing industry are quite important, for example, to make the case, for example, a deposit scheme for plastic bottles. Because if you can show that the economic values as a result of plastic leakage to the fishing industry is arbitrarily, and I'm using this X million, then that makes the cost or the economic basis for taking action. So coupled with all of this information is really the need for us to quantify that economically and show the disruption to some of particularly those elements of the blue economy that we have to address. What is also interesting that has come out through our assessments, and this seems to be across all of those 6 countries, is that if you look at the plastic waste and leakage at a per capita basis, what we see is that the tourism sector has almost 2 to 3 times higher waste and leakage associated with it, that's a tourist, versus a resident. And why is this important? Well, if you think of the tourism industry growing into the future, then the need to actually address that now before it becomes a significant problem will be quite important, because as many of you would realize, the tourism sector is an important economic driver in many of these countries. Next slide, please. So what came out of all of this? Well, it was a process. So through the quantification of our plastic waste, we, in each of these 6 countries, actually created multi-stakeholder, worked with multi-stakeholder platforms, usually coordinated by the relevant government agencies, together with civil society partners to actually look at some of the potential solutions from a very practical point of view. And this resulted in what we saw as 9 potential solutions to address the recyclable plastic waste in the context of small island developing states. And these included things like bottle-to-bottle recycling, waste-to-product, non-food dispensing systems for hotels, circular B2B logistics as some of those examples. But what we did was, through that initial assessment and together with the working groups, recognizing that we could not deal with all of those different solutions in all of the 6 countries, prioritize them in relation to national needs. So in cases, what ended up out of this 9 solutions is that we had really them falling into 3 main categories. What is interesting is one of them was into bottle-to-bottle recycling. And in the case of Antigua and Barbuda and Vanuatu were the 2 countries that actually saw that as an important element to address the PET issues. So we've been working with the government fairly closely to pilot and demonstrate that this is a solution that can be working. The challenges, of course, are that being a small island developing state, transportation makes it economically viable to have such systems in one country. They need to be transported, and the logistics of moving this material then adds costs and adds a whole series of other logistical and economic issues that need to be addressed. And I think this is particularly relevant to small island developing states where individually there isn't really the market volume to demonstrate such solutions, whereas combined, there could be a much better solution, but that requires then coordination and management. And this also makes us, for example, been working with, in the case of the Caribbean, with the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States to ensure that we can actually try and enable us to coordinate some of this work as we progress.
1 minute, Jannika.
The second area is really waste product actions. And then finally was really looking at some of those circular B2B logistic issues. Next slide, please. So very simply, all of this really resulted in what we developed was very specific business plans with costs and benefits, and actually working with local partners to demonstrate these actions. So in each of these 6 countries, there are different solutions that are currently being piloted as demonstrations of success. Where we need to move from here is really to provide the investment in the long run to actually make these into actionable actions in the long term. So this is what we see as we move forward. So last slide, please. So one thing we've been trying to do with this project is actually not just do the work, but actually demonstrate our change and actions. And one of the ways we do that is what we call outcome tracking. And what is interesting from this is that these actually capture change at a societal or a societal actor's actions. And when we look at it, what we see is actually we've been able to influence a number of different actors with the work we've done together. Surprisingly, a large number of them actually have been with the private sector at the local level. And so finally, just to close, I think one area that particularly in relation to small island developing states is extremely important is to working with small to medium enterprises and businesses, because the solutions they need are very different from the large corporates. And actually working with them, I think, is going to make a significant difference. And I think we've demonstrated that there is a need and a capacity and the will to address that. And we hope we can actually move forward on those in the coming years. So with that, I will close and happy to answer any questions when.
Thank you so much. Very interesting presentation with lots of content in there to think about as well. And just so everyone knows, we will be sharing all the slides within the next week. So you will have a chance to see these in detail, and also a recording of the presentations. I guess, Jannika, I mean, I really liked that slide at this tracking outcomes. It's always nice to see outcomes and to see progress. We've got some questions for you. Firstly, I think you mentioned sort of the logistics between the SIDS and also around the need for investment in the long run. How easy is it to get that, though?
Well, I mean, that is the hard part, I think. But having said that, there are a number of different mechanisms, and I think it has to be looked at as a package of different solutions from different sources. For example, in the Caribbean, I know the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund is just about to launch a grant type program that will produce or will be offering grants to address very specific issues around waste management, which certainly is a mechanism for addressing. We do know the GF program, particularly GF8, has a very ambitious program on the circular economy, which I'm sure Lawrence can explain a little bit more in detail, that hopefully will be a very useful investment to address some of these actions. Plus, of course, philanthropy and private sector businesses also need to contribute. So to me, I see this as a mechanism that has to be dealt with multiple sources, not just one source of income. Yeah. Plus also government investment, which is quite important.
Yeah, excellent. Here's a question here from the participants. How is this initiative engaging the private sector, especially the tourist industry? And you mentioned that around the importance of leakage in the tourist industry and addressing that. So what work are you doing there?
So our process has been, and one of the challenges, quite frankly, we've had was that a large portion of the project actually had to work during the COVID crisis. So the traditional method of working, which was our planned method, which was in-person meetings and workshops, had to be done virtually. But what we have done through this whole process is actually, in collaboration with government agencies and others, identified the different sectoral stakeholders and actually invite them into the process. So for example, as we developed those alternate value chains, as I showed earlier, it was a process through a series of initial meetings, discussions, and through that process, actually identifying champions who were willing to take some of that action forward. And I think in St. Lucia, the St. Lucian government, particularly the Department of Sustainable Development, has been very successful in working or identifying a very high value restaurant chain to actually demonstrate some of these solutions. So it has worked. I think, quite frankly, had the COVID-19 crisis not happened, it would have been even better. But it really is a process, I think, that is imperative. Could it be better? Definitely. The one group I would say where we've had we've had a few more challenges is with the fisheries sector. So that is certainly one that I think, from our perspective, we would we've been looking at how we can encourage a better participation in that.
Okay,
group.
And just following up on that, are you tracking plastic wastes coming from hospitals and schools?
We track plastic waste that ends up in the landfills. So we do have, if you look at our assessments, and we do have very detailed assessments for all of the 6 countries. We don't track schools particularly. We track household waste and commercial waste at that level, but we do not track hospitals per se. But
okay, excellent.
we see it in the waste, it's tracked at the landfill level.
Okay, great. And it's good to see that tracking and that quantification, as we talked about. It's really important before. I was just going to mention here, Lorenz was just sharing with everyone that there is a lot of engagement with the tourism industry through the Global Tourism Plastics Initiative also, which does encourage specific actions by tourism actors of all sizes and provides guidance on many of those actions. He's provided a link there. So please go to that if you'd like more information. One more question for you, Jannika, and it's, is the percentage in the waste composition study based on volume or weight?
Weight.
There we go. Nice, quick answer there. So thank you very much. If you could just stay online, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring Lorenz Asher and yourself into the room, and I'll just ask some final questions. And I'm just going to move the slide on. If you could just go through to the next one and the next one. And we've got a little bit of time here, probably about 5 minutes, a little bit, maybe 6 minutes. I squeeze out an extra minute there, but we'd really like people in the room, and you can share your ideas in the chat. You can please feel free to sort of talk to everyone there. But here's just a couple of questions for everyone. I'm going to ask our panelists this too, but what are the activities or issues that SIDS find most difficult in addressing plastic pollution? And Asha had quite a list there before of that I wrote down. So she's ahead of the game here, but Jannika also mentioned quite a few things that are challenges as well. So please share your thoughts in the chat. The other question is, what support or information do you think would help SIDS to consider joining the global commitment, or support them in joining the global commitment if they were interested? So please, if you've got questions there, or you've got some answers there that you'd like to share, please put them into the chat. And meanwhile, I'm going to ask Asha first. I mean, I know that you gave us a bit of detail here, but what do you think is one of maybe the top two, and that's going to be hard, or maybe just two, because it's hard to prioritize, activities or issues that you think SIDS find really difficult when they're addressing plastic pollution?
Thank you very much, Alison, and thanks to Jannika for that very, very useful presentation. I'm going to just try to reflect on a bit of what he said and just talk about a bit of a practical example from the project that NORAD and Iucn is doing in Antigua. So there was a major bottle collection initiative, and it went very well. There was a lot of excitement. It was highly incentivized. I don't know if that's in terms of, there was a deposit per bottle that was quite attractive. So that encouraged a lot of participation, and that was great. So we got a lot of bottles out. But even through that process, there was, and this is not in no way a critique of the project. This is just the practicality of it. There were certain types of bottles that could not be used. So they had to be the clear bottles, not the blue bottles. And so what do you do with the blue bottles? The bottle caps weren't included in it. So what do we do with the caps? So these are just the practical things that we have to think about when we work through these programs, that we have to find solutions for, or can inform our importation strategies in the future if we do want to ensure that all plastic has added value moving forward. So that's just one practical example of just things that you didn't really think about, or you don't think about until we have to work through these projects. So that's just one thing. And I can say, again, I speak for Antigua, that this project has been very, very helpful. Again, it's been a lot of awareness raising, from the youngest to the oldest, just a different way of thinking about what we do with these bottles. And I have to say that traditionally we are a very reuse, we are very keen to reuse. You look in any Caribbean mom's kitchen and there are lots of butter containers full of leftovers, and we use the bottles for our drinks. So it's something that we have done but it's just to ensure, just to take it from the personal into the public and on a national scale for more comprehensive solutions. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. And again, just bringing it back to capacity. So we did need a significant amount of support to have this project. And for training, for awareness raising, to support, to enable local collectors to do this work, to set up booths, to get, I'm not sure the name, but the people have to be hired to do this work, to do the sorting. So that's capacity there. Another thing that I think my colleague from Antigua who's working on this, she did highlight that, and I think it was mentioned, and I mentioned it before, is that so we can put all the work into sorting, we need to have networks and channels to that want to use this plastic. And within the region, there is no major recycling. You know, I think there were efforts to ship it to some countries in Latin America, but then COVID and different, is the cost prohibitive? Is it worth it to ship it to across the Caribbean Sea? Are we getting value for it? So it's just a lot of things to think about as we find solutions for very small populations. Would it be useful? Would it be environmentally sound? Would it be sustainable to have a recycling plant, for example, in Antigua alone, to serve Antigua? Is that a useful endeavor to go into? Do we want something for the region? Who wants to be responsible for collecting everybody's waste? So it's just a lot of things to think about, and this is just one aspect of it. So yeah, I hope that's helpful.
No, that's very good. And I sort of am struck also just by that giving it a go, though, is important as well, like getting started on something so that you can kind of learn through the journey.
That's been very, very helpful.
Excellent. Yeah. It's very good. Jannika, I guess that very much resonates with what you said before. One question I have for you is, how important is context? I mean, sure, you can learn a lot from other countries and there are lots of smaller and developing states here, but do you have to really consider context as well? Is there still also quite a lot of differences between each country and each community?
You do. There are similarities and there are differences. And it's quite interesting because when we look at what's happened in the Caribbean and the Pacific, we do see differences. And one of those, quite interestingly, is the waste management systems in the Caribbean actually more structured around municipal waste collection and in a structured form, which actually makes the whole waste management process a little different from what we see in the Pacific regions and how you address it there, but it's less formalized. So there are those kinds of institutional differences. Having said that, there are also similarities in terms of the kinds of issues that you see. And I think Asha has very eloquently pointed out, really, it is the issue of the economics of all of this, right? How can you make that economically viable? Because if you cannot make it economically viable, there really isn't a solution. And this then goes to, as was pointed out, the blue bottles, as in the case of Antigua and Barbuda, really requires then regulation to be put in terms of the specifications of what kind of bottle can be imported in to supply those solutions. And it's quite interesting. Yeah, I was talking to the government of Grenada just a few weeks ago, and they were talking about the new regulations for importing products for alternates, food containers and things like that. And just even importers understanding what is required is quite a challenge. So, you know, there's, as was pointed out, capacity building is really essential at all levels. And then one final thing I think we do really need to recognize in all of these countries is that really national capacity, because of the size, government officials are overwhelmed with a large number of work. And really, however much we love, I mean, that is a very significant challenge to addressing what can be a complex problem. So quite often, and I know during the COVID crisis, particularly in Antigua and Barbuda, with all of the Ministry of Health's other actions, it put quite, I think, on all of the individuals working that. So I think that has to be placed in how can we make efficient systems, and this is where maybe technology actually has to come in and play a more important role in the small island developing states.
Okay. Thanks, Jannika. I'm going to ask Lorenz now, just very quickly, because we're running out of time. Lorenz has got one of the worst positions at the very end here, but Lorenz, I guess what you think are maybe a couple of the key challenges that you've seen or experienced, and maybe just a general sort of comment as well around how you see maybe the global commitment helping to sort of provide a bit of a framework for bringing together some of this work.
Yeah, that's difficult for
for you, the last for 1 minute.
And it's and with my track record of talking on and on, but I'll do my best. I mean, no, certainly, but I think Asha and Jannika have already mentioned a lot of these elements, and I think it's crucial to join the dots and to see, okay, if we import something that perhaps works in a different setting on a big continent with a big population mass, and that product that has been designed potentially to work in those conditions, even though many times it doesn't even work in those conditions, you import it into a SIDS context, then the problems are compounded. So I think the maybe one key challenge in SIDS and everywhere is that we need to start thinking on a systemic way. And actually, we probably still don't know what the end solution, the circular economy for plastic products looks like. So we need to be quite imaginative. And indeed, I think working with the tools that we already have, well, if you have a problem, if you have a product that becomes a problem in your context, well, how can we, through trade policies, perhaps incentivize that product doesn't make it to the island? How can we, if we're importing products through shipping companies, how can we make those companies as well part of the solution by taking back? I mean, of course, these are not original ideas. These are things that are perhaps being experimented, but they might not work today with the rules of the game that we have, with the economics that we have. Maybe we need to change the economics, and that's the whole point. I mean, we have been assuming that we can just produce products in a linear way, and then somebody else will sort the problem. Well, maybe we need to return this responsibility back into those that are putting this product in the market. So working on extended producer responsibility, as Asha was mentioning. And maybe just going into the second part, sorry, on the global commitment. I mean, I think the good thing about the global commitment is that this provides as well this kind of a community of like-minded stakeholders that are working from the private sector, but also from the government sector, including as well, NGOs, civil society, universities. And the idea is that this can help in creating the mass, connecting as well with businesses perhaps that already have solutions that can help in your context, businesses that often the same businesses that are perhaps exploring solutions in a completely different part of the world might actually also help bring that solution into your country. So I think it's this kind of community of practice and putting in touch a network of institutions are working in the same towards the same vision.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Lorenz. And that was actually a very good sort of ending point too, I think, around thinking about thinking creatively about the solutions that we'll need in the future. It's a very good point, I think, for everyone to remember. I'd like to thank all the speakers. I'm just going to move to the last slide and just sort of give a brief wrap up. I think in today's session, we actually had a very rich discussion. We actually shared a lot of different perspectives on this important topic around urgently addressing our plastic pollution crisis. a reminder that one step along the way can be joining the global commitment. And so if you'd like to follow up with myself, Lorenz, or Ran on the global commitment, then please contact us. But whatever the approach, I think all speakers really talked about the importance of a life cycle approach to address plastic pollution and how important that was. Asha provided some really useful food for thought on the progress and the need for SIDS to be involved in the negotiations and the types of actions that are important for SIDS to realise in any future agreement, but also now in implementing urgent activities on the ground. And in addition, Jannika really provided some examples here on the ground related to quantification and activities. So together with the work many of you are implementing at national and community level, we're moving in the right direction. We need to keep that momentum going, and we hope you will continue to join us, and particularly jump on the Islands forum there, and you can share your ideas and share your thoughts on today's webinar as well. I'll be jumping on there and maybe providing some comments too. We'll be circulating all the webinar presentations today. Hi to Joel, who just joined us, but he'll be joining us for the Pacific Islands workshop, which we'll be hosting in 2 weeks' time on the 5th of April, or 1 week, 2 weeks' time, I think. Time flies now. So I'm just going to actually turn the session back over to Melanie, who started the session at the very beginning, just to make some final comments. But from me, thank you very much to all the speakers and to all the participants. Melanie.
Thank you, Alison. Thanks so much for doing such a wonderful day today, a wonderful job today. As you said, it has been a really rich discussion, and it does feel like in some ways the conversation's just getting started. So please, see this as an opportunity. Come and join us on the Green Forum. I'm going to be personally asking all of the panelists to join us on the Green Forum Plastics Group and to share their presentations there. You can continue to direct your questions there, and we will continue the conversation. Thank you, Laurence, Asha, and Jannika, for providing such wonderful presentations and context to the plastic challenge. I think it's very clear that all stakeholders have a role to play. There's plenty of work to do. Asha, thank you so much for raising the issue of behavioural change. We hear it over and over again when consulting with SIDS, and it's certainly something that Islands is very focused on. This is just the first of a webinar series. Please feel free to contact us if you have ideas for other topics. We heard today a lot of discussion about the need for enabling environments for addressing plastics, and one of those enabling environments is sustainable financing. So we'll be hosting a webinar on that. We also heard some speakers mention the need for regional approaches to recycling. We can't recycle our way out of the plastics problem, but we do have to improve recycling rates on SIDS. So under Islands, we are working on a global shipping partnership to provide free backhaul to recycling markets from SIDS. So we'll also be providing additional information about that partnership and hosting further webinars on that in the future. So thank you everyone for taking the time. This has been incredibly inspiring, and I hope that we can continue through the series of webinars and through our work on the Green Forum. And if you do feel like staying up late, we do have the Pacific webinar on next week, but we don't expect you to. But please do share it with colleagues in the Asia Pacific region. And with that, thank you, everyone. I'll leave it at that, and we'll close the webinar. Thank you again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.